Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, with our main topic today. While Egypt announced the discovery of 16 burial tombs in west of Alexandria at the temple of Tapo Ziris Magna, and we are going to shed light on this in addition to the foundation of the city of Alexandria and the Alexander the Great, and the main famous sites in Alexandria like Bibliotheca Alexandrina and also the house light of Alexandria. To shed more light on this, we have the pleasure to host this morning Mr. Ihab Kamel, researcher and historian. Good morning, Mr. Kamel.
Good morning.
Mr. Kamel, could you give us an idea about the latest discovery in west of Alexandria?
Well, this latest discovery, actually, it's one of several discoveries that took place in this site. As we all know, Tapo Ziris Magna was an important ancient city that was founded in the early Ptolemaic period during the time of King Ptolemy II Philadelphus in the early 3rd century. And actually the excavations had started there since a very long time, since we had started excavating for Alexandria. As you know, modern Alexandria was established by Muhammad Ali Pasha over the old site. The early discoveries had started maybe in 1805 by the Italian imperial representative Evaristo Breccia, until we had reached this new discovery. The discovery itself, it's very important because it contained lots of important artifacts with coins that bears the pictures of Cleopatra. Yes. We had discovered also over there some Roman period mummies that were buried behind the temple, and as a matter of fact, this shows that in the ancient times the west of Alexandria became very important, and the more you go to the west, the more you will find, because there was lots of trade with Libya. Actually, this excavation, the importance of this excavation, it shows the burial customs and the funerary customs during the Greco-Roman period.
Yes.
And it shows that during the Greco-Roman period, the Greeks and the Romans became so much affected by the ancient Egyptian burial customs to the extent that they had abandoned cremation and they had started burying their deads exactly the same way the Egyptians did. We will notice as well that the quality of mummification was not very good.
Why?
Because
why they found the mummies in a poor state? Although most of the mummies are well preserved with the ancient Egyptians used to well preserve the mummies, and also it was mummified later in later stages, isn't it?
Let me tell you about mummification in the Roman period. In the Greco-Roman period, mummification became available to everyone, so it became like a mass production thing.
So normal people used to do it.
Exactly.
Not professional people.
No, professional people, but it became very cheap.
Yeah.
The quality, because it became something like a mass production thing, it became available to everyone. So the quality of mummification was not like the ancient Egyptian times mummification.
Yes.
So it became available to lots of people. And strangely, in those days, after they used to mummify the body, they used to take it with them to their houses, take it home and put it in the reception room.
Yes.
And every visitor who would come to visit the house, he would have a look at the mummy. At the mummy. But after a while, they would take it to the temple to be preserved there in a big tomb or a big cemetery, and they used to pay rent. Yes. As well. But it seems to be that the temples used to get loaded with mummies. So it seems to be that secretly they used to smuggle them out of the temples and bury them behind them to make enough space to receive new mummies. That's what used to happen in the Roman period. That's why the quality of the mummification in the Roman period was not really very good, was not the top quality.
Yes. Yes. So these discoveries of the mummies, the latest mummies in west of Alexandria, what would it add to the discoveries in Alexandria and also to the graves in Alexandria? Alexandria encompasses a large number of tombs and graves, especially in the modern era, isn't it? At the start
yes.
of the 19th century, for example.
Yes,
it
that's
had
true.
a special style, isn't it?
Yes, the Greek-Roman style and
Yeah.
the mixture in iconography in Alexandria,
Yes.
of course, makes Alexandria a very rich site. However, for a very long time, we had focused on Alexandria and neglected the West. Let me tell you that the west of Alexandria, all the way until you get to the Libyan border, it has got a lot to offer. Like, for example, in one of the resorts, Marina, which is a huge resort, they had discovered over there Roman villas.
Yes.
Rich Roman people used to stay over there, away from Alexandria, in a quiet area, and we found their mosaic floors, lots of those. Especially that most of those people had trade with Libya.
Yes.
So the importance of the west of Alexandria, especially the place called Taposiris Magna, was that it had a harbor as well that used to receive lots of trade from Libya and sending lots of trade from Egypt to Libya, which means that this city was rich and it had flourished. And that's why it was established at a very early age, at the
Yes.
time of King Ptolemy IV, Philopater,
Yes.
and it flourished until the time of Emperor Justinian,
Yes.
6th century AD.
Yes. Yes. Could you give us an idea about the shipping and exporting and importing in this era?
Well,
Through Alexandria.
we have
Because
to,
it lies, of course, on the Mediterranean Sea.
Alexandria,
Its importance as...
Alexandria was the cradle of civilization in the Greco-Roman period.
Yes.
That was not only just a harbor, but it was a cultural center because of the famous museum, the great school where the great philosophers used to teach, as well as the famous Bibliotheca Alexandrina.
Yes.
As well as it was the biggest port in the whole Mediterranean region and maybe in the world. And this did not change even in the Roman period, because in the Roman period, Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. So imagine, without the wheat coming from Egypt, Rome would starve.
Yes.
And that is, and this was a huge trade. So from Alexandria to Libya to Rome, and Libya was a Roman colony, or became a Roman colony.
Yes.
So Alexandria used to trade with the whole world. The amazing thing was that every ship that used to dock in the Alexandrian harbor, the Portus Magnus,
Yes.
as they used to call it, if they had carried any scrolls or any documents, they used to force them by law to hand them over to be kept in the Alexandrian library.
Yes.
And they used to make copies from them and give them back to the owners of the ship or whoever. And that is why the Bibliotheca Alexandrina had more than 1 million manuscripts.
Yes. Yes.
This was not the
That
only...
was established before by Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great made the establishment.
Yes.
He established Alexandria when he had connected the island of Pharos to the mainland near a village called Dracotis with a huge dike that was called the Heptastadion, and that was the foundation. But the real construction of Alexandria had started during the time of his successor, Ptolemy I Soter, around 300 BC. Because the Ptolemies were not rulers who were going just to make a fortune and leave Egypt. They realized that they are rulers of Egypt and they will live in Egypt for good. So they decided to make Alexandria their capital, and they decided to make it a cultural center, a cradle of civilization for the whole world.
Yes.
Of course, you will find that famous teachers, they attracted them to go and teach over there, like Demetrius Phalereus, the one who came up with the idea of the Bibliotheca Alexandrina. And as the time had passed, the Ptolemies became Egyptianized. There was nothing Greek in them except the language they spoke, as well as some minor traditions or customs. They started becoming Egyptianized. That is why you will notice that the early tombs of the Ptolemaic period, they don't have any sarcophagi. They have urns, because the Greeks used to cremate their dead. Later on, they started becoming Egyptianized, and they started mummifying their dead and burying them like the Egyptians.
Yes. So how did the city of Alexandria expand during the era of Ptolemies, and what were the most important sites at that time?
Of course.
That was after Alexander the Great left Alexandria.
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Alexandria, when it was designed like a chess billboard, divided into a number of districts, 4 districts mainly, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta. The most important district, of course, was the Alpha district, which was called...
Where the port
it was
lies.
close to the port, near the lighthouse, and this Alpha district was called the Brocchium, the royal district.
Yes.
That is where the Ptolemies had lived, that's where the nobles had lived as well, and that's where the royal cemetery was located that contained the tomb of Alexander the Great. According to the historians like Josephus and Strabo, they mention that the tomb was located over here. Even one of the Roman emperors, his name was Septimus Severus, he went and he visited it, and he left his jewelry over there. According also to the documents that were left by the historian Plutarchus, he mentioned that the tomb during the time of the last Ptolemaic ruler, Queen Cleopatra VII, around the year 30 BC, this royal cemetery was in a very bad shape, and it had deteriorated, so it was totally restored by Cleopatra, and the gold sarcophagus of Alexander the Great was actually stolen by one of the Ptolemies, or was taken by one of the Ptolemies and melted to coins to be able to pay the mercenaries whom he had employed to bring him back to his throne. So when Cleopatra went to the tomb, she couldn't believe that the Alexander's mummy would be on the floor, so she replaced that gold sarcophagus with a glass sarcophagus. Yes. That was the most important part. By the way, this royal district, for a very long time, we've been looking at it in the mainland until the French expeditions in the 90s by Jean-Yves Empereur and then Franck Gaudieu. They had started diving under the water in the old port of Alexandria, which is now a fishing port, and they discovered the remains of the royal district of Alexandria. Down there they had found lots of statues for the Ptolemies, they had found huge statues for Egyptian deities, the remains of buildings that looks like royal buildings, so it's underwater. And this was the most important part of Alexandria. Unfortunately, Ptolemaic Alexandria hardly exists because it had faced 2 major tidal waves that had taken, like tsunami, that had taken most of it under the water.
Yes. So, Mr. Kamel, how did the Ptolemy's era ended in Alexandria, and how did the era of the Romans start, and how do you describe it?
There's a dramatic change between both, because simply in the Ptolemaic period, Egypt was an independent kingdom. Yes, it's ruled by a dynasty with foreign roots, and yet Egypt was an independent country. The the Ptolemies had ruled from the year 300 BC until the year 30 BC. The last ruler was the famous Queen Cleopatra, Cleopatra VII. After her defeat in the Battle of Actium and her suicide, and we're not sure that she committed suicide. We knew this from William Shakespeare in his play. But after her death, anyway, Egypt became a Roman province. There's a very big difference between an independent kingdom and a Roman province. A Roman province means that you have to pay tributes to the empire that owns this land. And starting from then, Egypt became only a Roman province, and yet Alexandria stayed during the Roman period that lasted for more than 600 years to be the capital of Egypt until the Arab conquest in 642. And still, Alexandria was considered to be the most important city during the Roman period, and the residence of the Roman viceroy or imperial representative in Egypt.
How were the Romans and the Greeks affected by the civilization of ancient Egyptians?
As I mentioned before, the Ptolemies, as they stayed in Egypt, they became very much Egyptianized. The customs had changed. The burial customs had changed from cremation and taking the ashes and putting them in urns and putting them in a locally, a bit by bit. They had started to mummify their bodies and bury them in sarcophagi under the ground, like in tombs, like the ancient Egyptians. Also, Ptolemy I, he had unified a bit between the Egyptians and the Greeks when he invented a new deity, Serapis. The Serapis, the Egyptians used to worship him in the form of the Apis bull. The Greeks worshipped him in the form of the god Harpocrates, one of the forms of the god Horus as a child. And that actually had started turning the Greeks a bit by bit towards the Egyptian gods. And actually they started becoming more and more Egyptianized, to the extent that the last Ptolemaic ruler, Cleopatra VII, she spoke ancient Egyptian better than Greek. In the Roman times, the situation stayed the same. It did not change much. However, Egypt, as I said, was a Roman province, and of course this was the most important province in the Roman Empire, and that's because, as I said before, Egypt was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. Without Egypt, the Roman Empire would starve, literally. And that's why they had given Egypt, and especially the Alexandrian citizens, the Roman citizenship. The Alexandrian people, they were given the Roman citizenship, and they were treated in a very special way from the other Roman provinces, to the extent that when Christianity had started spreading in Egypt, the Romans at that time were not yet converted to Christianity, and yet they tolerated a lot, and that's so that they wouldn't deny themselves the wheat that was coming from Egypt.
I thank you very much for your valuable information and for your time and for coming today, Mr. Ihab Kamel, researcher and historian. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Well, with this, my dear viewers, we come to the end of this interview. I leave you now with my colleague Nermeen Abdurrahman.